always reach forward into that new covenant and pull a little of it back into the old covenant world. You saw that in the Bible whether you knew it or not. Remember David? He sins with Bathsheba and he writes the 51st Psalm and he says, my sin is ever before me. The sacrifices of God are not lambs, you don't want bullocks and lambs. The sacrifices of God are a contrite heart and a broken spirit. Where did he get that? That's not in the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant never says the sacrifices of God are a broken heart and a contrite spirit. That's a New Covenant message. David's ahead of his time. The sacrifices of the Old Covenant are burnt lambs and burnt offerings. You'd think David's a liar, or he's jumped in a time machine, went forward to the future to see how things might be. No, David is doing what Jesus does. He's reaching forward into a better covenant, full of better promises, and he's dragging them back into his situation, and he's throwing them down, and he says to God, see what you really want. And God goes, you're right, you're a man after my own heart. That's an amazing thing. You get that glimpse as you journey through the Old Testament. You realize what David is doing there. And so Jesus is doing that every day. And he's pulling people, trying to pull that covenant into people's hearts. But he's got to go to the cross because that's where he can effectively snap that old covenant back. He can break it. He can weaken it. He can render it ineffective because it can hold no more sway over man because the ultimate lamb will have died. Your conscience can be eased. Life can spring forth out of a tomb. And then the Spirit can move inside of us. So that's the journey Jesus is on. On his way there, he's dealing with Israel. But let's make sure we remember, pull these two together. Old covenant, I'm the God that heals thee. New covenant, you can have everlasting life. He's in an old covenant world with a bunch of people who only identify God as the God that heals them. So Jesus goes about doing what? Healing. Why does he heal? You go, well, because he's a healing Jesus. Okay, but that's generic. That doesn't speak to covenant. I mean, it makes for a good song, but it doesn't speak to covenant. Why does he go through healing? And why does he focus his healing on Jews? Why doesn't he focus? Are there no sick people in the Roman Empire? Are there no sick Gentiles? I mean, one woman comes to him that's a Gentile and says, hey, will you heal my daughter? She's at home. And Jesus ignores her. And the disciples get all excited because I kind of think they're like the mafia. Because you notice they're always trying to keep people away. You know, like people that feel like suddenly they have a super important job. Like I think the disciples walk around like they got earpieces in. Even though the technology didn't exist yet, there's just something natural about doing this, thinking that talking into their robe wrist. One goes, what are you doing over there? I get too sidetracked with that foolishness. Yeah. And the disciples say to him, you want us to get rid of her? Tell her to go home? And Jesus says, I just came for the sheep of Israel. And the woman comes back, and you know the story. Jesus, shall I give the bread that belongs to the children to the dogs? The woman says, yes, but even dogs eat crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus goes, man, that's faith. Because you can have whatever you need, go home. He admitted crumbs is all you get, but crumbs is all you need because there's so much bread in the new covenant, even a crumb will change your world. Wow. Okay? We're going to bring the unleavened together to make one loaf at Pentecost. And the crumbs that fall off will change the world. So, but I'll drag a piece of that bread out of the future for you, lady. That's awesome. That is cool. And so she goes her way and she's healed. You know that story. So Jesus is healing. Let's just call it what it is. Jesus is healing Jews right and left. Why? Does he like them more? Well, he loves them more than he loves the Gentiles. No, he came for them, but they have a way to define God. And what is it? I'm the God that heals you. And so Jesus has to hold on to that understanding of God or they won't recognize him as God. So he has to hold on to it. And yet out here in the future is an everlasting covenant, one that brings life. And that's going to be full of Gentiles. Russians and Japanese and Americans and British and French and Brazilians and anything on the earth. And he wants to bring that into their world, but he's got to do that balance because he's there for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So everywhere he goes, he starts healing and he starts doing miracles and he starts raising the dead and he's sending subtle messages through them. And I think John catches it better than any of the other Gospels because John starts throwing in miracles that don't appear to be the kind of miracles you'd look for out of a Messiah. I mean, what's the very first one he performs? Water to wine, John 2. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell you about that. John not only tells you about it, but he makes sure you know it was the first one ever. Like he's saying, we've missed it. Jesus was trying to say and do things we never saw before. Water to wine, Old Covenant, water turns to blood. When Moses touches it with his staff, the water turns to blood. When Jesus touches it with his hand, his staff, his authority, water turns to wine. And so Jesus starts to perform these miracles.